Thank you for having me here to talk about my little farm and our little slice of the world. We're in Prince Edward County, Ontario, which for those who probably don't know, we're a little sort of peninsula in Lake Ontario, one of the warmer spots in Eastern Ontario and also one of the driest, which can be a challenge sometimes for growing. 2020 was an interesting year. My partner Heather and I run the farm. We've been doing so for the past 8 years, going on 9 now. The years do add up scarily sometimes. Our farm, different from some of the other ones tonight, we are a mixed vegetable operation. As you can see from the photos, we do largely intensive crop planting, and we're growing a fairly large variety of things. If I had to guess, we're probably growing somewhere in the ballpark of like 50 different crop varieties throughout the season. So we keep pretty busy. We are, as of this year, functioning at a total of 12 months of the year, where we are either growing or distributing vegetables. And part of that is due to how COVID kind of affected our farm. Just a little snapshot of what some of our crops look like. Our farm traditionally has been a mix of food boxes, so a CSA, for those who are familiar with the community supported agriculture model. And then probably about a third of our business the last few years has been the farmers markets. Up to this year, we've been doing 3 farmers markets in Toronto and 1 here locally in Belleville. And so in total, we're still driving to Toronto and we're serving the Prince Edward County and the Quinte regions with our vegetables. Last year, we did a 200-member CSA in the summer, and we ran about an equally sized one in the winter with about 200 winter members. This year, we ran a 70-member spring pilot project. It was supposed to be 50 members, but then people kept knocking on our door and it ballooned into 70. And then somehow our 200-member CSA turned into a 400-member CSA this summer, which is good because it meant that we had income. It was also daunting because it meant we had to suddenly shift about 50% of our business over into a different revenue model from what we had, spent the winter meticulously planning to make happen for ourselves. We were lucky in the spring. We had a lot of winter vegetables left over from the previous year. This is a sample of our main produce cooler. We can generally keep most varietals of produce in some state of sellability up until the end of June, early July. So we were able to make use of a bumper crop of carrots from 2019 and a bumper crop of onions from 2019 to supplement and make our spring CSA viable. We were able to combine it with what we were doing in the greenhouse with what we had stored. Because it definitely wasn't something we planned on when we started doing seedling production at the start of March. Things were starting to get a bit scary, but it wasn't until we it started the first round of crops, first things were growing, that all of a sudden we realized, oh crap, we're going to have to completely rethink how we were approaching this garden year. So we went from having our lovely early seedlings planted to having to design on the fly a spring vegetable rotation in our greenhouse and getting that seeded immediately and in the ground so that we would have vegetables for April, May, and June so we could supply people during those months and try to take a little bit of what we expected to be a drop in farmers market sales. This is a sample of what it looked like in the early spring as we were slowly planting stuff in. Growing at this time of year and for this type of sales was relatively new to us. So it was definitely a bit of experimentation, but happily the customers were happy. We made it through. We were able to provide more than the vegetables that we needed out of the small space. and it helped cushion the farmers markets that ultimately kind of didn't emerge. This is just us in our little pack shed in early March, getting some of the winter carrots cleaned up and ready to go out the door with our lovely masking on, so that the different households that were mingling were as safe as we could be working in the vegetable room. In a normal year, this is a picture from late in the summer. Our staff normally is about 5 of us full time. So that's Heather, myself, the 2 ladies in the middle from Mexico come up every year to work with us for the 6 months of the main season. And then we've got 1 person in Belleville locally who comes out to work with us full time. And we've got a team of 2 to 3 sort of casual work part-timers. That's what our labor situation should look like in an average year. But sort of about, I guess, a week or 2 before they were due to arrive, we were waiting anxiously for them to get their entry visas and to confirm their flights, because they still had to quarantine for 2 weeks at the time they were going to arrive. And we found out that they weren't going to be arriving. More than 50% of our workforce was going to be stuck out of country and was not going to show up for the start of the year. We've already sold the 400 CSAs. We've already committed and bought all the seeds, supplies, everything. So our expense outlet's more or less there. So we panicked, started trying to figure out what we could do. Largely, we just had to sit and wait for paperwork to get processed. So started to try to think creatively, find ways to save on work, to find extra workers. Sadly, the dog did not work well as a car driver. Too many pedals and the higher function brain. We did try to reduce the efforts that the work that we could eliminate. So one thing we did was we used some of that funding that we got from the early sales to really revamp our irrigation system. Traditionally, we had some overhead, but we spend a lot of time moving hoses around to water all our crops. So we took the dive. We, I think, quadrupled our irrigation capacity with the simple goal of being to reduce the labor we needed to put into it. We knew we were going to be short-staffed for a significant percentage of the season. This was one thing we could do to try to save some effort, try to reduce some work. Helped, but as I'll go into later, didn't help as much as we were hoping it would. Part of the challenge with all of a sudden, doubling your sales capacity is we needed to suddenly go out and upgrade our capacity to stock, sell, move vegetables. So buying more totes, reorganizing the wash station to be able to run the capacity through it that we were going to be needing to run this summer, which was a major challenge, especially figuring out the different, I guess, time scales that we suddenly were dealing with. So we went from a 200-member CSA to 400, and trying to figure out how long do we need to dedicate to harvesting that to actually get it to market. And what it ended up doing was we had to sacrifice an entire extra day of our production cycle to harvesting. So we were spending 3 days harvesting, 1 day doing distribution at the markets, and we only had 2 days left to actually, grow vegetables, which was insufficient, particularly with our low staffing. We were lucky. We were able to reach out to members of our community. More than half of the group that you see in this photo is volunteering for the day with us. In terms of those who are full-time on the farm, there's less than 4 in this picture. So it definitely saved us that we had the volunteers, but generally we would be working till about 9:30 at night, trying to get the pack done. Occasionally would run over and run into the morning. It certainly was not ideal. And as the season went on, we started to get a little bit more feel for how to manage 400 members and how to actually pack, plan, and do all that. But it was definitely a period of transition. to get there. Our farmers markets kind of materialized, but then again, not really. This is Heather at one of our farmers markets in Toronto. All of the markets had some form of social distancing, and the markets went to varying degrees of success in terms of having customers come in and actually buy things. Overall, sales from the market stream dropped by about, I think, 80% for us this year from where it had been. Financially, we were okay because we had put the money into the CSA, or we transferred the business over there, but it also meant we still had commitments to these markets. We were still going to them. A lot of them were CSA pickups. So we're standing there, but in most cases, we didn't have a lot of customers buying it, and we didn't have a lot of variety. Like, this is late July, this picture, and we really only have 4 things on the table. Everything we were producing was going out the door to our share members. And we even had to reach out to neighboring farms to try to supplement what we weren't able to grow ourselves. Because in combination with trying to adjust to this very large shift in our distribution, markets looking completely different from what they had looked like before, having the increase in the share, we were also struggling with the fact that we just couldn't grow enough of the food that we needed to. And a couple reasons for that. One, drought. What you're looking at should be knee-deep water in our marshlands in the back of our property. The drought we experienced this summer was on par with the drought that we experienced in 2016, which was, as far as I'm aware, the driest summer recorded for this area. So it added an extra layer of challenge to an already challenging year. So that combined with our labor shortages, one of our workers from Mexico made it to the farm the first week of June. The last one was the last week of July. So until the very end of July, we were short-staffed, and we only have a 5-person core team to start with. So just missing one person for that length of time, it's really hard to make it. This is sort of the nemesis of the year. Was we just lost control of weeds on our farm. This is a field of onions, believe it or not. This is at harvest time, what our onion crop looked like. We managed to get some onions out. Believe it or not, this was weeded, but we simply didn't have the labor to get in and weed it again. So we just had to take the loss on these onions and hope that we could put the effort into other crops and try to balance the conflicting interests. Same thing happened with our pruning on our tomatoes. We weren't able to keep up with that. Just again, labor problems. Potatoes as well, we saw major declines in that crop just due to an inability to tend them and inability to control the weeds, do the hilling when it was needed to be done, and control the pests on them when needed. So this should be a full bin of sweet potatoes, just to give you an idea of some of the yield challenges that we ultimately had, simply from the weed angle, but then also all of our planting and whatnot got shifted and delayed. So we saw smaller than normal carrot yields simply because we just weren't able to access or get things into the ground, get the soil prep, to get the seedlings in the greenhouse and out of the greenhouse in short enough order to keep on top of it. So anything that was a long season crop struggled. But those were our challenges. Happy to say we came through overall through the year with more or less intact, a few more gray hairs perhaps. But the farm survived. We were able to glean just enough to maintain our winter CSA from the previous years. This is Heather loading in our first delivery round. Luckily, the weather, at least in Ontario, has been fairly generous this fall. So we've had a much warmer than normal November. So where we didn't have as much root vegetables, we were at least able to make do with a lot more fresh green vegetables. We were able to still get them cut lettuce, arugula, kale, and other greens into the shares and at least maintain that. We weren't able to grow it, but we were able to maintain it for this year. Looking forward to next year, I think despite all the challenges, 2021 is looking to be a year of hopefully not as dramatic, but hopefully more meaningful change for Fiddlehead Farm. We plowed up a new 3-acre patch to add into our 10 acres to allow us to put some land to fallow, but also to allow us to start cycling more crops into the garden as we try to meet the demand that we're seeing for the food in the area right now. We decided we would double down on the Spring CSA pilot project, and we're going to triple it for next year and put up 2 new greenhouses, which will actually be my project tomorrow morning, is starting to put up the actual ribs for the house. And that's kind of how the year's been for us. A massive roller coaster, a lot of grief in the middle. Things started to turn around towards the end. And I think where we're sitting now is a decent footing for us going forward. We're looking at making some positive changes, which I'm looking forward to. I'm happy to say this picture here is more what the farm should look like and what it did look like by this fall, even though we had a fairly rough start and middle to the growing season. I think that's how 2020 has been for us. I hope that's been interesting for people. Thank you for letting me share.
That has been very interesting. There's lots of comments in the chat generated. Thank you very much, Steph.